Hello, and welcome to the Den of the Monster Ox. Today we are reviewing What Remains of Edith Finch. What Remains of Edith Finch is a collection of strange tales about a family in Washington state. As Edith, you'll explore the colossal Finch house, searching for stories as she explores her family history and tries to figure out why she's the last one in her family left alive. Alright, so here is the quick, spoiler-free version of my review. Protagonist has very little to do with the story, so while not bad, is a little forgettable at the end of the day. Story progression is mostly episodic, but never felt repetitive. Environmental storytelling, top tier, easy. And the antagonist takes some time to uncover. For me, it took multiple playthroughs of the game, but it was easily worth the effort. Overall, an absolute must-play game that only takes a couple hours to complete. Like, literally 2 hours if you are going slow. Alright, those who don't want any form of spoiler, here's your time to tap out. Everyone else, here's your spoiler warning. And let's get into it. Our protagonist is Edith Finch Jr. She is the daughter of Dawn Finch and the great-granddaughter of Edith Finch Sr., who goes by Edie. There actually isn't much more to add about Edith beyond her place in the family tree and what we learn in the game synopsis. She honestly has very little to do in the game except be the narrator and be the eyes through which we see the Finch home. She isn't bad, but this is not your typical story narrative. She doesn't really have a story arc of her own, unless you really look carefully in the environmental storytelling, which we'll get into later. Overall, score a 3 out of 5 for average. Not good, not bad, just is. And there is an antagonist in this game. I promise. Figuring out the nature of the antagonist takes time and a fair amount of analysis. In fact, when I first watched this game being played by another YouTuber, I had to look up videos to help me understand what exactly was going on. Since everything you need to figure out who the antagonist is can be found in the environment, let's circle back to the antagonist after we go through that section. The game as a whole is very episodic, as most of the story is told as you move from one family member's story to the next. These segments take some thought to put together into a sense of chronological order, and do contain critical pieces of information on the family curse. For being a surprisingly short game, this game feels very well paced. There is always something to see, and therefore there is always something to learn. The stories each have a unique flow or mechanic that keeps them from getting stale or feeling repetitive. There are 3 key segments that are different from this formula and do provide key pieces of context. The first is the opening. In the opening segment, we see a child on a boat that has a cast on their right arm. The child opens a journal, and as they start to read, the player starts to see what the narrator and author of the journal is writing about. This establishes everything the player sees and hears is what is written in the journal. Therefore, the stories are what was told to the writer and not necessarily what actually happened. Second is the cemetery. The whole cemetery area is filled with clues and important pieces of dialogue, but there is one critical piece here that advances the overall story, and that is the statue of Odin, Edie, and Sven Finch. This part of the cemetery establishes the place that the expectation of death and the remembrance of those who had come before has in the family. Third, the night that Edie and her mother Dawn left the house. Near the end of the game, we see the night that our narrator left with her mother Dawn from the family home. Now, there are two critical lines that are given in this sequence that we will return to when we discuss the antagonist further. Those lines are,
"The thing you're afraid of isn't going to end when you leave the house." Edith has a right to know these stories.
My children are dead because of your stories.
and we will get back into the importance of those lines in a little bit. Overall, I was very impressed with the story flow. Very well done. Gets a 5 out of 5. Now it's time to go through what I think, honestly, is a masterclass in how to do environmental storytelling. While our narrator does give some critical pieces of context, most of the answers to questions lie in what you see lying around. Now, the best examples of environmental storytelling are actually the scenes that help explain our antagonist. So I'll be holding off on showing those areas and scenes until we get to that. And there are enough small things laid out for you to find that trying to build a list of examples would take quite a while. So what do I do to show my evidence for this masterclass? Well, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So, this is a single scene from what we see in Edie's room. Let's take a second to see what we can find in this single frame. First, we have the obvious news article in the middle. We see that Edie wanted to save the moment she made the front page of the news by not evacuating when there was a massive fire. To the right of the TV is another article that was saved that talks about a mole man that lives under the Finch house. Those who have played the game will know who that is an obvious reference to. Next, let's look through some of the books on the shelves. A few titles caught my eye. The Illusion of Life, The Mysteries of Death and Thereafter, The Finches, A Falling Flock. Now, every area of the game can be gone through just like this. Every area has something to contribute to the story, and it is very, very well done. So I give environmental storytelling a 6 out of 5, and now let's get back into what the environment says about our villain. So, in the description of the video, I will leave a link to a wonderful video that does a full breakdown of our antagonist. The video is about 52 minutes long, which is about half the length of the game itself. I won't go into as much detail here. So for my Reader's Digest version, let's quickly go through the two rooms that provide the most evidence against our antagonist. First is going to be Molly Finch's room. Molly's room is the first one that we get to explore, and chronologically, she was the first of Edie's children to die. Molly was only 10 when she died, and her parents made a number of questionable choices that led to her death. Among those choices are locking a 10-year-old in her room and letting her get so hungry that toothpaste seemed like a food option. But my biggest question is, why is there holly in the bathroom? Now, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it is common knowledge that holly berries are very poisonous. So why is it there in a kid's bathroom? Second example is Barbara Finch's room. We learn about the death of Barbara Finch through a comic book that is left on Barbara's memorial/shrine. The comic contains information about the residence, like the layout of the house and the location of a secret key that you need to access the basement. This begs the question, then, how would the comic book writers know that level of detail without someone in the family giving it to them. So again, if you want a full breakdown of our villain, watch the video linked in the description. But here's what I love about our antagonist. Edith, the great-grandmother of the story, did not kill, nor did she have any direct connection to the deaths of any member of her family. However, after a bit of analysis, it is fairly obvious that she did benefit from their deaths. She was getting her moment of fame and attention, and all the while blaming the so-called family curse for the tragedies that befell her family. This gets back to the conversation that Edith overheard, where Edith says that Edith has the right to know these stories, and Dawn says that her children are dead because of these stories. Edith wanted everyone to know these stories regardless of who they hurt. Now, from a different point of view, most of the deaths were, in fact, tragic accidents, but I'd argue that at best, Edith did little to nothing to attempt to stop these accidents from happening, and at worst, made conscious decisions to encourage tragedy, like putting a swing above a cliff. And all of this, the player has to uncover on their own. By looking around at the environment, picking up on the context clues, as the game doesn't outright tell you any of this. I absolutely loved how Giant Sparrow wrote in the antagonist and the meaning behind it into this game. Easy 6 out of 5. At the end of the day, I love a good story. One that makes me think, one that gives me a reason to want to go back and try to find answers to questions. I've seen games like What Remains of Edith Finch that hide meaning in the environment, but I have to steal a line from the video, again linked in the description. I enjoy stories that are open to interpretation, but only when there are actual answers. Unlike some of its peers, What Remains of Edith Finch did an absolutely amazing job of leaving things open to interpretation, but provides answers to those willing to put in the effort. While there is a large amount of tragedy in this game, after all, our narrator is the only living member of her family, there are many insights and experiences that the game offers that make this game very easy for me to recommend. A very well earned 10 out of 10 overall score. Alright, if you agreed with my review, leave a like, and if you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If there is a narrative-driven game that you would like me to review, down in the description is a link to my Discord, where I have a channel just for game suggestions. I already have a few games from the suggestion box coming up soon, and with that, thanks for joining me in the den, and we'll see you back for the next story review.